Hi, good morning, everybody. I'd like to start the program. Thank you all for joining, and thank you to Indegene for putting on this presentation. Today's presentation is the role of generative AI in the streaming medical information response fulfillment. Our speakers today are Sandeep Gantati, who's the AVP of Enterprise Medical Solutions at Indegene. Also, Ritesh Dagra, who is the AVP of Medical Tech Commercialization at Indegene. And Dr. Shubha Rao, who is the Senior Director of Enterprise Medical Solutions at Indegene. Please join our panel today as they provide perspectives on the application of large language models, or LLMs, to the medical information function based on some promising early experiments they've done. This presentation today will help you to distinguish between LLM and supervised learning approaches. It will help identify meaningful use cases for LLMs in medical information. It should help you anticipate potential opportunities to redefine the human medical information role in the face of increasing automation. And it'll help you articulate an implementation pathway for the integrating LLMs into routine medical information practice. Please, everyone today, ensure you are muted. You may place any questions you have in the chat that's at the bottom of the screen on your menu. Please note there will be polling questions during the presentation today, so please respond accordingly. And we will be recording this presentation, and it will be available via the membership portal. Without any further ado, Sandeep, please take it away.
All right. Thank you very much, John, for the warm welcome, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to the membership of PhactMI. Great to see a good turnout, I think, for a very interesting topic. John has kind of done introductions here already. I think we've got a good mix of technology or technical know-how as well as domain expertise. As John mentioned, we've been doing some early experiments here, trying to see how these large language models can be used in our medical information fulfillment workflow. And I intentionally use the word fulfillment because I think we're thinking beyond content, right? So we're thinking about potentially contact center applications and other such applications. So with that, I think the agenda items here, objectives have been laid out already. I think it's important before we kind of get into the topic, I'd like to just spend a few minutes and outline, at least from our perspective, where we think a meaningful business outcome is for what we do. So we are continually in a state of requiring to be always on, right? As far as I can see, none of our workloads are going to go down. They're just going to increase over time as we launch more products, as we have more information coming out. So just from a practical perspective, what I'd like to do is paint for you a picture of sort of the business context, right? So why are we even talking about this, this topic? So if we think about the medical information fulfillment pathway, we have sort of synchronous or episodic interactions. We call them synchronous because it involves having a requester and a contact center specialist being available at the same time, synchronized in terms of time. And these interactions will be episodic, obviously. We consider them to be high cost, high barrier because our qualified medical information specialists are higher cost resources. And the barrier being that you have to be available both at the same time in order to have that exchange of information. On the other end of the spectrum, we have what we call sort of asynchronous or continuous interactions. So meaning that, I can be having a request at any given time. The information is available to me. These are typically your self-service kind of channels. These are lower cost and lower barrier because it doesn't require two people to be, available exactly at the same time. Now, one of the things that some organizations are trying to do from a business context perspective is, can we create self-service portals, et cetera, that are, impactful, meaningful, and provide relevant information so we can potentially try and shift some of the traffic away, right, from those sort of synchronous interactions. The other, I think, compelling use case, which we'll touch on today, is there the possibility for some of our newer automation methodologies, large language models, for example, to have a scenario where we sort of have an intelligent shifting of the customer between both of these modes of engagement, depending on workflow and business rules that we apply. So I think that's sort of the compelling question of the day. PhactMI, of course, is an organization, has several working groups. Your NSI Working Group is also looking, obviously, at generative AI and its application in medical information. So just, I mean, this is a pathway I think that all of you can relate to. Really, our job is to intake an inquiry, research that information, condense it, summarize it, and then put it back out to the customer across a variety of channels. So just from some data that we have collected from interactions we've had with several of our colleagues in medical information, we spend a fair amount of time actually looking for information, right? To search for relevant content to summarize. And then from your own PhactMI benchmarking survey from 2018, these are just, these numbers here reflect only custom responses, right? And then beyond that, all of your organizations are managing several hundreds of documents, right? They have to be kept up to date and available to be disseminated to a customer upon request. So I think really what we're trying to do is understand, can these large language model technology be a potential solution to help us manage a customer experience better, but also to help us manage how we manage our content that we eventually provide to our customer. Before we get into a deeper dive, I think it's important that we do a little bit of baselining in terms of understanding what is a large language model. It's kind of a newer term, and we just want to make sure the membership here has at least a basic understanding so that the rest of the discussion makes a little more sense. With that in mind, I'm going to call upon my colleague Ritesh to provide us a little bit of a background. We won't get too technical, just enough information for you to be able to distinguish this from some other approaches that you may have heard of. So Ritesh, I'll just call upon you to please take us through that.
Thanks a lot, Sandeep, and a pleasure to be here. So essentially, we all have heard about LLMs and some of them. Let's say, even if we have not heard, LLM is essentially L stands for the large, L, the next one is for language, and M are models. Now, LLM together is a large language model, and the large, by large, we mean billions and millions of data points, which it has been trained on, and it generates natural language from large amounts of data. How it does in the backend, for some of business folks, all of us on the call, it uses deep neural networks to learn from all the data points that are out there and can perform multiple tasks. For some people who are more, tech oriented, this is called GAN, Generative Adversarial Networks, which essentially help generate those data points. And the classic example of this is the Chat GPT, which is an application built on LLM AI. And it is a neural network which uses transformer architecture. The technique underlying is called attention to focus. And what it does is, based on the algorithmic patterns, the vectors, and all of mathematics involved at the backend, it generates data points which are more or less right. And with 175 billion parameters, this is the most powerful LLM till date, the Chat GPT, what you see as an LLM manifestation in your routine work currently. So that's on the LLMs. And how does generative AI, what are those models? We'll just touch upon in the next slide. So there are a lot of LLMs present in the market. The GPT, which I spoke about, is text to text, but we have evolved from a position where there are codecs, which is text to code model. Natural language, it transforms to machine code. There is Whisper, which does the speech to text. And then there's DALI 2 for text to image. And if you have done text to image, it is very natural that you should do an image to text. If there is an image, for example, and my favorite example is uh, quite a few times you would notice the image does not fit the right text. And a very rudimentary example is, you talk about a pediatric patient getting a dose administered, and then you have an image of a mid-aged female for that matter. So all of these, whatever a human could do, there's a lot of efficiencies which different LLMs present in the market can drive, and with a lot of promise. And again, one thing which we have seen, and you would see some representation of it in where we are progressing, is this has actually blurred boundaries between tech and SMEs. So gone are the days when business or SMEs would give instructions to tech to create something, and the tech would get back, and rest is left to all our creative imagination and experiences which we have encountered. So here is actually a platform where both of them can work in tandem together to solve some of the pertinent business cases. And with that, if we move to the next slide. Now, this is very interesting. And the fundamental question which people have been asking is, what is then the difference between traditional AI and Gen AI? So there is a lot of differences between traditional and Gen AI. And essentially what happens is, and this goes beyond, whatever you get in theory, because let me tell from some practical experiences. So traditional AI would be used for predictive. It would use and analyze data and make predictions. But Gen AI, as the name implies, can actually generate content or new data. And there's a lot of use which people are doing around removing gibberish data, generating synthetic data for that matter for experiments, and a lot of it is happening around. Now, traditional AI, you would change on limited data sets. You will go into company-wide data sets. And we were having an internal discussion with engineering team, what makes them excited about generative AI. And their answer was, you need, in traditional AI model, you will need data. On the top of data, you will need an annotation. After the annotation, you will put the data in the system where it will learn. There will be a supervised learning, meaning every time an SME would see whether it has learned the right way or the wrong way. How do you make it learn better? So to that extent, it requires a lot of human supervision. LLMs have reduced that cycle significantly. And there is a lot of unsupervised learning and unlabeled data. You practically would not need annotators because the foundation models exist, and the foundation models can be incrementally trained to perform a lot of tasks. So there is, and with that, obviously there would be some challenges where you have to control the quality of outputs generated and some of those. But essentially, the kind of promise which generative AI offers is way beyond what traditional AI models have done in the past. And that's where you would see everybody looking at this generative AI to solve problems which have been not solved, with conventional AI models. And with that, I think we can move on. So, so a lot of promise which I have mentioned here, what generative AI could do or would do, but I think it requires Sandeep to obviously keep us grounded and get back to what it means for all of us from MedInfo perspective.
Right. Thank you, Ritesh, for that backgrounder. So with that sort of foundational knowledge, let's now get into some different potential use cases that we could see for LLMs and some of the experiments that we've been running. And we're really, really excited to show you some of the work that we've been able to do. So just before getting into that, an industry view. Okay, so many of you may be familiar with the MAPS organization. So this is the Medical Affairs Professional Society. We had a forum actually just this past July, And it was sort of a think tank of a variety of members thinking through what would be some generative AI use cases. Among several, and you see the strategic pillars that we were looking at. We were thinking about strategy and leadership. We were thinking about evidence generation, etc. Medical information was very much strongly viewed as a potential area or opportunity for generative AI in two areas. So one was insights generation. So being able to ingest literally billions and billions of data points and then be able to draw inferences, for example, was very compelling. The other area was content creation. And that seems to be a pretty obvious one. The NSI focus group within PhactMI is in fact looking at that exact use case. We propose to this membership today, there are probably other use cases beyond content creation. And that's why the title of this session is Fulfillment of MI requests, because we think there's application beyond that. So some things we're going to look at today are listed on the screen here. So content authoring and creation, very obvious use case. We're also going to look at potentially how this generative AI can help us respond to MI inquiries better. So for example, be able to propose responses to provide to a customer, or even to be able to triage a particular customer through a workflow, depending on their particular inquiry. Another interesting one that we think has a lot of promise is in fact, all of your organizations, I think, operate across the globe, different markets. So we see also an interesting opportunity to do almost near-time near point of contact, sort of translation of content. So we'll show you a bit of some of that work that we've done there as well. So taking the first one, right, content creation, it is a fairly manual and repetitive task. I think this is a workflow that all of you can relate to, where we look at various data sources, we synthesize it, we extract relevant sections, paraphrase it into a particular style guide or format, and then we publish it, right? And that becomes now a searchable source of truth for subsequent inquiries that may come through. So at this point, I'm going to ask my colleague Shubha to show us a few examples of how we're envisioning large language models in content creation. So over to you, Shubha.
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much, Sandeep. So before I get into some of the demos, just to give some more background as to what you're going to see in the demo. So we are not using ChatGPT to do our experiment. So it is not the traditional ChatGPT, right? So this is the tool that is developed in-house. And as I think Ritesh was mentioning, I guess the GPT or LLMs is actually blurring the line between the domain expertise and the technology expertise, right? I think more and more SMEs, just for you to know that I don't come from technology background. I'm more on the domain side, right? So, but I'm able to experiment few things, even with limited knowledge of how LLM would work, because of, I think, the applications right now that we have. So the SMEs like me or the domain expertise are able to now experiment, look at, how would LLM help in the domain that we are in, and then, probably then take it to the engineering team, the technology team to help take it to the production level. So that is the background that I want to set up. Sandeep, if you could just go to next few slides. So the first demo that you will see is on the summarization aspect of it, and the reason that why we've taken clinical trial data, right? It could be anything. I mean, it could be a literature article that I would take and then summarize it for, let's say, HCP consumption. It could be for patient as well. I think the one challenge that we used to see so far with the traditional AI model was ability to read the table data and then generate content. So for that reason, we took that as the first experiment for us to see would generative AI address that challenge that we had. And I think we are seeing good results. And that is what we will be demonstrating today. So what we've done is taken data from clinicaltrials.gov, and it's in the tabular format, as you would see here in the image as well, and try to create summary based on just the data, based on just the trial results for patient and for physician consumption. And again, to mention here, anything that we had to create for patient, right? Is a patient-less summary, patient-friendly language. Again, the traditional model, there was challenge that the context was lost, right? It was unable to generate a sentence that was actually meaningful. So again, with generative AI, I think we have promising results where we know that, lay summaries could be created, and it has wider application. It could be creating an informed consent with protocol, clinical trial results from, or, patient friendly summary from a clinical trial results, or any of the lay summary, right? Or creating a patient information leaflet from labeling. So there are wide ranges of use cases that we can see by looking at the creation of patient summary itself. So with that, I'm just going to the demo part of it. So what I will be doing is that I will just show you the data that I have taken. So this is the clinicaltrials.gov site. Most of you would have seen this, and the trial results, if it is available, will be available in one of the tab. And this is how the trial results are there, right? There is no, as such, the conclusion part of it, but rather, information in the tabular format. And as I was saying, this was the first use case that we wanted to explore to see, can generative AI be able to help understand the tabular structure and then provide summary. So this was the input or the source data that we have considered. So with that, I am going to go into the first demo, which is on the creation of a summary part of it. So what you see here, I'm just going to pause here so that I can explain again. What you're seeing is not ChatGPT, but this is a tool that is developed in-house. And this is to be used by a domain expertise. They can, experiment to see the required output they want or outcome they want. And also some of the other aspects that you can see here is that because these models are, they are chargeable, right? For each run that I'm doing, that it is going to cost me something. So you will see here when I run this application that you will see the cost for, each of the experiment and the tokens that I'm consuming, because your cost is associated with tokens. In simpler term, tokens is nothing but the word count. In technology terminology, the tokens are word count. So based on number of tokens that would take to generate the output, including the input that I am giving, the cost will be calculated. So that is something that, as a person part of operations, I would want to check on, is it going to cost me more than if I have to do it manually, right? Those are the analysis that I'll be able to do. But for now, we don't have to worry on those, but rather look at the results that we will get out of this particular experiment. So the tabular data that I showed from the clinicaltrials.gov is been got into this content pane here. So it takes a certain format, right? The LLM models you can't just take directly the table. So they have to be converted into JSON format. That is what you would see. The tabular data has been converted into JSON format and given as input. And there are specific instructions been given for it to generate the summary. For example, if I could limit the word count, right? In here, I've told, I think 350 words is what I'm looking at to generate summary. I could do it 2000 as well. And also, have instructed to say that I need specific headings to be considered. For example, introduction, study purpose and details, benefits, risk, and conclusion. And then, further instructions to be given to say that it has to be at grade 5 level. That is what is the expected if I'm creating a lay summary. So, I've given that instruction and a few more instructions to say that what would a lay summary mean, right? So all those instructions have been given. And in, again, a technical term, these are called as prompts, prompt engineering. So that is happening at the back end. So that is available at the back end when I give the input, and when the model is run, this is the output that I get here. And few things to notice here, because I've given instruction to say, keep it in the lay language. So some of the technical term has been explained here, right? For example, what is placebo? And there are some adverse events that have been summarized here. Pneumonia has been explained in simpler language, and so is rhinitis and so on. So some of those technical or medical term can be explained because I've given that instruction to be considered when it is summarizing for a layperson. And also what you will see is that because we look at the language. Sorry, I'm just going to go back a little bit. So the language has to be at grade 5 level. I've also asked the LLM to give me the flesh reading ease score, right? So that I know it is actually for patient level summary. So that's what you would see here. Yeah. So you can see here, flesh reading E-score has also been provided. Anything above 70% is considered to be, patient-friendly language. So even that has been factored in, and though it is validated by SMEs, but I can also have the LLM do that validation as well for me to say that it is meeting the requirement. And same data, you would see that it is summarized for physician, which is a little more technical than what we saw for patient consumption. And also, I think the one thing that I missed to mention is in the input, just for the demo's sake, I have not considered all the data point. I think only few data points were considered. For example, treatment assignment, what was the outcome, and some of the adverse events. Those data were included here, and based on that, the summary was generated. Now I can take this further to say that, I have English summary, right? And I want to now translate this to various language. In here, you will see just I've taken one language, local language to be translated, but I can do it for, 10 or 15, so on, right? And also if a localization is needed, I can give specific instructions so that the localization can also be factored in. So you will see here that the next step of this is that English summary becomes the summary that you see here would become the input for the model now to translate it into French. That is what you will see here. Yeah. So you will see English was given as the input here, and I am running the model. So I get in the local language. And as you would see, these are all happening in few seconds, right? Of course, your prompt and all that has to be fine-tuned. Initially, we will take some time to fine-tune all of that. Once I know it is giving me the right result, then if I have to do it for the next experiment, then it is happening in few seconds in most of the cases that I'm getting the output. So this was one experiment that I wanted to show. I'm going to move on to the second one.
I think we've got a few questions coming in too. So maybe after this one, Shubha and Ritesh, we can take some of those questions.
After the
absolutely.
Yeah, most certainly.
Yeah, sure. So I've again giving some context to the second example or demo that you will see. This is in terms of extracting information from unstructured text to make it structured. The earlier one, that what we saw, tabular format, we can say it is a structured one, right? From structured, I have created an unstructured content, which is summary. While in here, I've given an unstructured information, which could be literature article, it could be a narrative, medical notes, any of those, right, can be considered here. And then from there, I'm taking in, asking the model to give me a structured output, which can go into a safety database, IRMS, any of the database, right? So once I have the structured output, it is easy then to, incorporate that into a database. So the example that you will see here is actually for an adverse event, right? That let's say a case narrative has come through an email. The model is able to read the email and then pull out the relevant information that is needed from an adverse event reporting point of view. Few things that I want to call out which was fascinating for us as well when we were experimenting, is that in here, if you see some of the text that are highlighted here, so this actually indicates that the patient was had other condition as well, right, other than what we were looking at for the specific medication. So nowhere, I mean, it doesn't explicitly say that patient had this medical history. And also there is another, somewhere else down below also talks about concomitant disease such as seizures and hallucinations. So what we saw, and that is what you will see in the video as well, is that the model is able to understand that it is medical history or it is concomitant condition. And it was mentioned in two different aspects, and both were, kind of looked into and, able to extract that information as medical condition. And another thing is that because this is happening on the same day, right? There are a lot of events happening. There are lab procedures that have been done. So when we are looking at adverse event reporting, each of the lab values have to be extracted, and for each of the lab value, I have to say start date, start time, end date, and end time, right? In here, it is all occurring on the same day, and the start point was 10 hours. So the model was able to understand, even if nowhere for each of the occurrence it is not saying, right, at same day it is happening, it is happening in the sequence, but model was able to understand that it's sequential and it is on the same day. And for each of the lab data that you would see was extracted out and given as start date as the same start date, and the time was considered based on here 10:20. After that it says after 10 minutes or after an hour some other procedure was done, right? So able to relate to that and then extract the information. So that is what you will see in the next demo. So I'm going to just switch to the demo feed. So what you're seeing here, the input, which is the content part of it, is the narrative, which can be there in the any of the adverse event form, or it can come through an email. It could be from any other source that can come in here, right? But a lengthy narrative was provided. And again, there are specific instructions that are running at the background for model to be telling that what is needed. And you will see that based on the instructions, it is extracted information. And specifically when we are talking about adverse event reporting, right, that for each of the element, I mean, you will see there are some element ID, right? For each of the aspect, if there is information I need to provide, if there is information, sorry, was there a question? Okay. So if there are no information, then there is specific way in which then I need to fill in the data fields, right? So all of those instructions have been given, and it is able to replicate for each of the occurrence. And then I spoke of past drug history, past medical history. They were in different line. It was somewhere mentioned at the beginning and towards the end of the narrative. So the model was able to understand, make connection that it is, medical history, it is, concomitant medication. So all of that information is been able to extract. So what would happen from here? It will go into safety database. Each of this individually, they get populated in the database with, a particular start date and start time and so on. And you will see that all the adverse events that was mentioned in the narrative was also extracted. So this again can be extrapolated to similarly for
and then she said the word off touch, and I was just
medical information related scenario as well.
She said she's found burnt pieces of paper in the dog's bed.
Can I request everyone to go on mute, please? I think we are hearing some background noise.
So I would mention this to you. She said, "Is there anything I asked? If there's anything I could do to help? If there's anyone."
Miriam, you are not muted. Miriam, you are not
muted.
muted.
What anyone could do to help, or something. And so, because she's, and I've explained to her that, because she's told me these things, I will mention it to you. So I'm just like letting you know, if you can. My mobile's not working, so if you can email me on this and just let.
So sorry about
Okay.
that. I had to mute
There
everyone.
we go.
So
Okay. Okay.
yeah.
Go ahead.
So what you would see here is the extracted data, and yeah, that's what I wanted to tell you. So I'm going to stop with this demo, and we'll take some question, and we'll come back with few more demos.
Yeah, we've got quite a few questions coming in here. So let's see here. All right. I think some of them have been answered along the way. Let's see, Retrieval AI.
A couple of questions which I thought,
go ahead.
We'll touch more on chat than anything else. So Shubha, first question, if you could help there. On the demo, there's a question from David, like what data does this LLM contain, or how was it trained? And did the LLM need to be trained to understand medical specific text to create an accurate summary?
Yeah, I'll answer the second question first. Yes, I think that is the customization that is needed, as I think Ritesh, you had mentioned, right? When we spoke of large language model, they are pre-trained, and the foundational models are already trained on billions of data, right? So that learning it already has, but then it still has to be contextualized to the experiments or the use case that we are looking at. So that bit of training is what is needed, and training here happens through the prompt engineering, right? That the instructions that I give, and tweak that instruction to see the output that I get. And then we will still need some data set. Unlike your traditional AI model, where I will require training data sets in thousands, I don't need that many training data sets. But if there are variability, I would at least need some of those being considered to look at the variability and train the model to get the output. But training for medical context is needed.
Perfect, Dr. Shubha. And there was one more question, which I thought could be nice to answer on the call. So, is this using GPT-4? How is fair balance maintained and content generated free of bias? I know we have gone through our own challenges and solved for that. So maybe the participants just want to understand from that perspective. So
yeah, probably I'll start with the first part of that question, and Ritesh, you can add in. The demos that you saw was, yes, it is GPT-4. And I know each day there is new LLM models that comes through. We are actually experimenting also with Claude. Right, so that is another model that we see. It is giving good accuracy. But I think I mentioned earlier as well that finally, when we have to take it to production, we also have to balance between the cost implication, because they are all related to token, and also accuracy, definitely bias, and so on, right? So for that reason, we experiment. First is to look at accuracy, second is to look at cost. So there are various other models that are coming up, and we have experimented, or we are continuing to experiment, all of them. Claude is another promising LLM, I should say, that is there, but the ones that you saw was using GPT-4. In terms of how do we ensure there is no bias, again, I mentioned at the earlier, at the beginning of the session, when I started demo, is that we are not using ChatGPT, right? Because they are based on the data that are available in the public domain. While in our scenario, or in scientific domain, one is there should not be bias, and there has to be medical contextualization of the content. So for that reason, we are taking, the prompt engineering is one way that we are minimizing bias, and the input data is our data, right? The one that you saw, clinical trial data, is the data that I have provided. So I know what is going in there, and I know what I need out of that, right? And that is the prompts that has been considered here, and that is how we are minimizing bias. But Ritesh, anything else that you want to add in? We can also look at a few other examples where we'll see how we are minimizing bias. The content summarization, and also something called as temperature setting and all of that. But yeah, Ritesh, on the technical side of it, if you want to add few more points.
Yeah, thanks, Shubha. So what Dr. Shubha just mentioned, there is also a temperature setting, and in layman's language, it is how creative do you want the generative AI to get, and that really depends on the use cases, the kind of use cases which you have, and the setting is from 0 to 1, being from highly creative to non-creative, and that's where you can do the temperature settings. You can see the kind of content which is getting generated to your use cases and take a call. Apart from that, there are technicalities like blue and rogue scores, which actually help scoring of the data and define. The third, and I think that's the most important piece, is how do you generate trust and explainability in the outcomes of generative AI. And I wouldn't like to take out the thunder this time. So stay tuned for that, and you will see it in action very shortly. So just to add to that, Dr. Shubha, when she gets on to the other demos. So
I think there's a couple of other questions on how long did it take to train the model, etc. I think we have a section coming up where we could address that. We talked about bias. I think there is a question here around the translation piece and ensuring accuracy. Maybe we could take that one, and we'll keep moving, and we'll get to some of the other ones as we get to those sections. Shubha, do you want to comment on the translation one?
Translation piece of it,
yeah.
yes. So again, there are scoring methodology that can be used to see the translation is accurate. Of course, in here, when when we are experimenting, we rely on our SMEs to review once to see it's translated accurately. So I know it is right, but along with that, we can also have scoring method to ensure that the translated content is accurate. We've also done back translation, right? Let's say English to French. I've done, I take the French and then back translate it to English to see is it actually changing the meaning, which in several I think experiments that we've done, it is not, right? So the meaning is not changed. So various ways in which that we validated, and we know it is not changing the meaning.
Okay, great. There's lots of great questions. I just want to make sure we get to some of the other areas. And I think we may have to take some of these questions a bit later, but we will certainly get to as many as we can. So I'm going to come back to the presentation here. All right. Great. I think we've got a polling question coming up. Let me just come to that. Second. There we go. Okay, let's go to the first polling question. And if we can have that up, please. All right, so here's the first question. So we're going to take this in two parts. So the first one is on, assuming that you could guarantee the accuracy, right? From the source to the extracted component through generative AI. The question here is really around the value that you would see as a MI team, right? So is it around, do you see speed as being probably the biggest driver of value for you in applying this kind of technology? Is it something around focus, right? So allowing you as the human operator, the SME, to really focus on the meaning of the response you're providing. Does it actually answer the question that is being asked? And then leaving some of the mundane tasks to the machine. Is it thoroughness, right? Being able to ingest a wide variety of information across different formats. Or is there a portion of you who feel like, you know what, we're doing it just fine the way it is, and we don't really see any value here. You can choose multiple points if you wish, and we'll give you a few seconds here to go ahead and input your response. Right, we'll give maybe a few more seconds. All right, good. All right. So we see most people gravitating towards speed and focus. Interesting. So we could potentially turn around specific tasks faster and really help us to focus our energy as MI specialists on the question at hand, asking follow-up questions, really understanding the inquiry and providing the best possible response. Interesting. So it's, I think, exciting to hear that at least from this sample that there is interest in really seeing where this technology could take us. So great. We're going to ask one more question here. Now, this is on the flip side of things. Okay, so this is now what key apprehensions do you have potentially in adopting this kind of technology? And so this is the flip side of that coin, right? So again, you can kind of see the possible choices there. Is it a level of comfort, right? Hey, I'm not sure the machine is really giving me the right answer if I'm not directly involved in that. Transparency, right? We're all about, we reference what we provide because we want to feel like, we have a line of sight between what we're providing to an authentic source. The third one, look, I'm going to be pretty blunt on this one. Some of this stuff is scary to people, right? Is there potentially a threat to my role, my capability as an MI specialist? So I want to make sure we add some of that human element in there. And then finally, the last one there, look, I don't believe there's any role for tech on this part. We'll give you guys a chance to put in your response, and then let's see what we get. All right, let's have a look here. All right, so I think the transparency piece, right? And I think one of the questions that came in the chat was referring to that. And we will be showing you, I think, some of the things we've been doing internally to help allay that particular apprehension. So some amount of transparency is there from what the machine is generating and where it got that information from. This is very, very consistent, I think, with what we've been hearing from our other colleagues. It's interesting that about 10% of you are feeling that, okay, this is starting to get, we talked about blurring that line between SME and automation. There's a section of this discussion where I want to tackle exactly that point as well. So great. Thank you guys for your participation. Very interesting. All right. So moving along. One of the other things I talked about right at the beginning was, can the generative AI actually help us ferry a customer between live and self-service, right? Based on business rules. So you see here kind of a typical workflow, right? So our inputs on the left, having to understand what is the question, right? So what is it? Depending on what it is, can you sort of automatically put someone into a different pathway? Can you start to automate maybe some of the responses or guidance provided? Put the person into a live human versus automated response, search for information. So there's a whole bunch of, I think, concepts in this one picture, and we'll give you a glimpse as to some of the experiments we've been doing in this line. So before doing that, I want to give you a bit of a story. So this story started in 2020, before we sort of had these large language models. We were using supervised learning techniques that we described earlier. What this picture is a training set. Okay, so across the x-axis, you have standard response documents, and then these are the different codes relating to different topics. On the y-axis, you have the frequency at which those particular standard response documents were used to address certain questions. So what you notice very quickly is that there's a fair amount of concentration at the extreme left, meaning that a few documents were used a lot of times to answer specific questions, but you see this very, very long tail, right? And so one of the limitations with the supervised model is the quality and quantity of your training set, right? So if you have used one standard response to answer one question in a year, that's probably not a sufficient training set to address similar questions along that line. So what we found is when we actually started to apply some thresholds, right? So we were trying to see what would be that fine balance between a quantum of documents or training set to actually help us reliably get accurate responses. So the first threshold we applied is, okay, we're only going to look at questions where standard response was used more than 10 times a year. And, we could toggle that threshold. The second threshold we applied was a confidence score. So anything machine generated has some sort of a probability score. 0 meaning 0 probability or 0 confidence, and 1 meaning 100% confidence. So we toggled that a bit. What we found was highly variable. So we took 3 different products. We looked at some different, so we trained the model, 3 different products using standard response documents. And we started to apply some of these thresholds. For product 1, based on the set of questions that we asked the model, we actually got 100% accuracy, meaning that the machine selected the correct standard response based on the question, and that was validated by a human SME. But for product 2 and 3, the scores were much, much lower. And I think that has to do with, again, the quality and quantity of training data points that we had. And I think this really speaks to one of the issues with these sort of supervised learning techniques, right? And so enter the LLMs, right? So is there potentially higher accuracy, better versatility? So I'm going to turn it back over to Shubha. We have a few more kind of demos to show you, different use cases. We'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, sure, Sandeep. And when I'm demoing, I'll try to answer as well some of the questions that were there in the chat. So the first demo that you will see is on the triage part of it. Let's say, there are mails that would come out of working hours. It could, come to such models wherein I might have, 10 emails that will come to a specific mailbox. And then the model is able to identify the context and then triage it to a particular scenario, right? So in here, what you would see here is that, someone is writing about, after taking a particular medication, they had headache, and this particular pharmacist wanted to know if this is a common occurrence that their patient had, and what can it be done to control, right? So at the back end, what we could also do is have the prescribing information made available so that the model is able to understand. First is, it is able to understand it is a query, and second is what could be the possible response for this, right? So that is what you will see here, that the prescribing information was provided, and it is looking at the email and then trying to let us know what is that particular correspondency is about, and based on that, what should be the next step. So you will see here, it is a medical inquiry, and also there is an adverse event. So it is able to categorize it such way. And then, and I think there was a question, I'm just going to refer back to the question and to let know, how we can tackle some of this, right? The hallucination, inconsistency, bias, and so on. So we can ask model to provide rationale. Why did it say it is an inquiry? Why did it say it's an adverse event, right? So that means I'm able to trace back for the decision that the model is made. So it is actually letting me know there is an inquiry because the customer is asking about the commonality of headache as side effect and how to control it. And because the patient has experienced headache, it has to be considered as an adverse event and action to be taken in terms of, reporting it to the concerned team, right? And because there is an inquiry, the suggested answer is this. It is providing us the suggested answer, and it is letting us know where is this answer coming from, right? The reference content is from the approved document, which was the prescribing information that was provided. And it is actually, tracing back to where this information is coming, right? The most common adverse event reaction is more than 2% of patients, for example, was this. So this is giving us the justification why this response is provided. So that way we can, train the model to look at in the right direction, not making its own, hypotheses and hallucinating information. So this was one of the example. And the second example that you would see here is, I'm just going to run the video. So you will see another similar correspondence and how the model is able to identify what, based on the content of the correspondence, or what should be the category of that. So the second one is this. It's about, I'll just pause here. This particular pharmacist, by mistake, had dispensed a different medication because the names were similar. And patient also took the dose and then realized, the patient realized that he was not taking the usual medication. Nothing happened. There was no adverse event as such. But then, the pharmacist wanted to inform the sponsor about this, right? So the correspondence is about that. So now, how has this been triaged? We'll look at that here. Yeah, so this is considered to be a product quality complaint and adverse event. And again, the model can be trained on if there are specific guidelines each company follows, we can consider that to be trained and categorize it accordingly, right? For example, let's say, in this particular company, such instances have to be reportable adverse event, though there are no adverse event, but a wrong medication was given, right? So it becomes a reportable event, and also as a product quality complaint because pharmacist made a mistake of wrongly dispensing the medication because of similarity in the product name, right? So probably the labeling team has to take action to provide certain clause in the label itself. So some of those action probably the company would take, but then the model is able to recognize what is the issue here and then categorize, and also providing justification why it is categorized into product complaint, as well as why this has to be considered as an adverse event because a wrong medication was given. So this is one triage example. I'm going to move to the next one, which is more on using the chatbot model here, right? So the scenario here is that a reporter, a patient, or an HCP, anyone can actually write to a specific email ID for a company. And then give few lines description about what that is, right? It could be, in here again, we are looking at an adverse event. It could be product complaint, or it could be an inquiry as well. So now, based on this context, the chatbot, the model or the persona of the chatbot will change, right? If it is, let's say, adverse event, the questions that would be asked would change from if it is a PQC, product complaint, or if it is an inquiry, and also based on who the person that is reporting. I know in here we are saying patient, but then based on such contexts, such as, I would like to report an adverse event that I suffered. So by looking at the language that is used here, it notes, the model is able to understand it is patient who's reporting, right? It could be a pharmacist or an healthcare professional or a doctor or physician reporting on behalf of a patient. Then they might indicate, right, my patient suffered. So then it knows, okay, it is an HCP that is reporting on behalf of a patient. So the questions asked in that scenario would change. But in here, we're just looking at one scenario where a patient is reporting about an adverse event with specific medication. So what would happen, if once this, email is sent to a particular mailbox, and email is sent back to the reporter or a patient, whoever that is, with an unique identification. I'm just going to put back. Yeah, so you will, the patient will receive an unique identification so that we are able to trace back, right? Let's say tomorrow there is some follow-up information by the patient, the reporter. So that unique ID will indicate, it is the same patient. Now, then once that happens, the chat bot module will open up, and there are a few questions that just for the demo's sake, we've asked only a few questions. The questions could be more than this, right? To gather all relevant information at the first instance itself. And again, the type of question, as I was mentioning earlier, would change based on what was the scenario. In here, the model is able to understand that it is an adverse event. It's about the particular products and so on, right? So the question is customized based on that scenario and also who is the reporter. And finally, when it gathers the relevant information, it kind of questioning back to say that, have I gathered all the information? Because now this information that you see would get converted into a structured format in here, COMS form, that can then go to the downstream, let's say, case processing team. So this is a chatbot module that you see here, which again, as I said, can take different persona based on the situation. I'm going to move to the next demo, and then we'll pause for few more questions. So this is the last demo, which is for the content search and summarization. And again, it will ask, I think it will kind of respond to some of the questions that we saw in the chat earlier in terms of traceability, right? How do I know from where this information is taken, so on. So you will see in this particular demo those aspects. So what you're seeing here is that certain reference document has been given, uploaded into this particular platform, and that is a PDF that you will see here, right? It's about a particular disease condition, about diagnosing criteria, and so on. This is the source PDF that has been uploaded to the model. So that is what you will see here. Now, there are a few PDFs that have been uploaded. Now, for each of the PDF, I can generate a summary, right? If I've given, let's say, a 10-page a document, then I can ask the model, we saw that in the earlier example as well, that I can ask the model to summarize it in 100 words or 200 words. So we can do that similarly here as well. And also it will identify keyword also for me, right? So I know, okay, this is talking about something about education program, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and so on. That is the content of probably this particular document. So for each of the document, it can do such summarization and make it available. And we can also actually combine 2-3 PDF here. When I say PDF, 2-3 different topic here, and come up with one summary as well, right? I can click on, if I have 10 PDF files here on different topic, I can click on 5 of them and ask to generate a summary that will be consolidation from all of this PDF. Now, this can also be further expanded to ask question here. So as you can see here that I've selected both the PDF. From both the PDF, I want the model to take response or get response for the questions that I have, right? For example, I'm asking here, what is the diagnostic criteria for HLH? So, and you will see here, both files have been selected, which is on the diagnosis overview, as well as, differentiating LALD, differentiating from HLH, right? So from both of them, it is trying to provide response. And also, as you will see, as I go further down, that I can trace it back to from where the information is coming from, right? I know I've just selected 2 PDF, but I can have 10 PDF from which it is summarizing, but I want to look at from where has this information come from, which is something that you will not see in ChatGPT, right? It's like a black box. I don't know from where the information is coming from. And I think one of the questions that I saw was about plagiarism and traceability and so on. So those aspects have been addressed in creating such platform where I would want to ensure, or I want to have control on what data that I am looking at, right? So it is telling me from page number so and so of the source is from where it has taken the content. So for whatever summarization it is done, for each one of them, it is telling me from which page of which document, also where within the document this particular information is available, right? Which paragraph and so on. So that information is providing me. So I know then that it is not hallucinating, it is not creating its own content, but it is actually picking up from the source file that I have given for it to take information from. So like this, I can go on asking any questions, and it will provide the response just in case, though I don't have it in this demo, in case I ask a question where probably this a file does not have response to that question, right? It will give me a response to say that unable to find that information. So it won't hallucinate and give me some wrong information, but it will tell me that I don't have this information because the source file did not have that information. Yeah, so that is what you will see here, that for each of the question, I will be able to trace back to the source data. So with this, I'll pause this demo, and then maybe I think we can take a few questions before we proceed further. Is that all right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've got quite a few questions here. Yeah. All right.
I'm trying to answer as many as I can over the chat, but yes.
Okay, maybe we can take one or two right now. Let's see here. Oh, we've got, okay, there's one here on periodic manual review. So this is, I think, in relation to the AE extraction, identification extraction that you showed, Shubha. The question is there periodic manual review still required to ensure that we're not missing any AEs? So any quick commentary on that?
Yeah. So one, I think probably we did not mention is that whatever experiments that we are doing, we have shown so far, we are not saying technology will take over any of those activities, right? It is not that. Rather, it will reduce some of the very, I would say, mechanistic activity, but retain human for actually reviewing what they have to review using their intelligence, right? So coming back to that question, we are not saying that human review is not required. Rather, when I put this into end-to-end solution or workflow, what would happen in an adverse event scenario, right? We can look at something that probably, machine can give me 100% confidence to say that I've extracted all information and so on, right? So such cases, I don't have to review, but I will, there are a few things that will flag to me saying that a review is needed is the one that goes to human review. And also we will have to continue to have sample review to ensure that, that we are not missing out the key information or not missing out information that has adverse events. So human review will still be there, but it may not be the way that currently that happens, right? We keep it for only certain or specific scenario.
Great, thanks, Shubha. We've got about 20 minutes left. There's another couple poll questions, and I do want to leave a bit of time to talk about some of our lessons learned when implementing technology. So I want to make sure we spend a bit of time on that. I think what we may have to do is answer some of these offline for our members here. We may not be able to get to everything at this sitting. All right, let's go back to questions here. All right. Okay, so let's get the third poll question up. So you've seen a few different use cases that we've talked about. This is about what's the value driver. Now we're forcing you to pick one. We want you to pick the one that you feel is the most dominant. But in terms of adopting tech, right? What's the big driver for you? Is it accuracy, right? So that so the biggest priority for me is that the automated system is generating an accurate response. Is that the most important thing? Is it efficiency for the customer? So if I can provide a more streamlined, simple, seamless experience through maybe triaging people through different workflows, is that the most important thing for you? Is it financial, right? So if you do some sort of an analysis and you see that by implementing tech, that budget impact is maybe less than if I was going to try and continue my MI services in the traditional capacity-based or bandwidth-based model. And then I don't expect to see anyone selecting number 4 because it seemed like everyone feels like there's some roles for tech. So I'll give you a few seconds to put in your response, and let's see what we get. All right. Yeah, so not surprisingly, I think accuracy, and I think I would tend to agree. In fact, that's what I answered myself. A close second is efficiency for the customer. So I'm thinking back to COVID, thinking to many of our colleagues here who had to double down on resources. There may have been very long wait times, delays in getting responses. So I think equally there may be importance there as well. So I think not surprising, actually, what the response is, but I think accuracy is number 1, given the business that we're in. All right, I'm going to briefly talk about a potential implication, right? And I think as much as our conversation today is about technology, I think it's also about people, right? So if we can successfully sort of implement some of these technologies, is there an opportunity to potentially look at some different things that we do in MI, right? Can we redefine that role? So that's the question at hand. So I think in adopting any kind of technology, I think there's very much a human factor, and it's about comfort, right? I think we saw that in one of the previous discussions. People have to feel comfortable with the technology. And there's 2 parables that I'm going to just use to explain this. So one is self-driving cars, right? So if a car pulled up, it had no steering wheel, no driver, no red, stop button or, alarm safety button. Would you feel comfortable using that technology? And then we see a lot of automation in aircraft, etc. So one of the things I think is humans, we feel comfortable when we can override the automation, right? So if we feel like, okay, it's not going right, I can somehow stop it and take control, right? But all practical purposes, if you look at this picture, there's a rear view mirror and there's a steering wheel. Technically, a self-driving car doesn't require any of those, right? Having it there gives you comfort, but you actually using it doesn't change the way the automation is working, right? But it makes us feel more comfortable. The other parable example is the automatic elevator, right? So a long time ago, some of you may remember, there used to be an elevator operator, right? It was only around 1950 or so that, these sort of automatic elevators came into existence. It took a long time for people to feel comfortable going from a human-operated elevator to one that we take for granted today. I don't think any of us thinks twice, getting into an elevator, pressing a button, and going up or down. The way I think that technology was designed was to give us reassurance. When we step in the lift, there's a soothing voice telling us where we are, where we're going, what to do if there's an issue, right? But really, you operating those buttons and pressing those things doesn't change the inner working of the elevator, right? But it makes you feel comfortable using the technology, right? So I think some issues have come up, obviously, some learnings, and I think not surprisingly at all, I think some element of transparency is critical for our role. We need to know where these responses are coming from. And I think the ability to kind of take control, I guess, override the automation, at least I think are some things that we'll have to do in terms of adopting these more broadly. So having said that, let's put up the last question. This is around sort of morphing or redefining the role. So if, again, hypothetically, if technology could ensure existing levels of query fulfillment, meaning that we could give correct answers. We could give them in a timely basis. We could achieve the same levels of service that we're doing today in our manual sort of controlled way. Here's some possibilities, right? These are things that some organizations are looking at today. Some of these are potentially coming into play in some companies. So you can kind of see those for yourself there. So is there an opportunity to have sort of a single point of contact model? So MI becomes, I don't know, a single point of contact for all things medical, right? So almost like a concierge type of concept, right? Instead of a customer having to go to multiple places, is there an orchestration role potentially? The second one is this hybrid sort of commercial medical customer facing model, right? Bringing MedInfo services more proactively, more front and center to customers. Is that something potentially that could come in? Account-based support. So from a business standpoint, there may be centers that are important from a therapeutic use perspective, academic research or otherwise. Is there an opportunity to provide more dedicated support? So you really understand that center, right? See what people say here. Interesting. We've got sort of a split across the board. Interesting that this single point of contact model or concierge model is the first one there. Few organizations that we've worked with do actually apply this, and it's really elevated the role of MedInfo, right? And I think if we can kind of focus on understanding the customer really well, really being able to get insights, I think that is a huge value to the organization. And maybe automation plays a role in some of the more mechanical aspects. Very good. Okay, last but not least, I'm going to call on my colleague Ritesh, kind of take us through some things that we've seen, that we've observed in implementing these kinds of technologies, some lessons learned, experiences, thoughts. So I'll hand it over to you, Ritesh, for this particular part.
Thanks, Sandeep. So, yeah, coming to the implementation pathway. And so what you'll see here is the pace at which technology is evolving is fairly rapid. While November saw OpenAI's GPT 3.5 come to life, we saw, the first LLM coming into December 22, and December 22, there was again Google's MedPalm coming in. Microsoft had Cosmos coming in Feb 23, and then we had a GPT-4 and so on and so forth. The latest one, which we have seen, is Amazon Bedrock. Now, essentially, there is a lot of advancements which are happening at a very rapid pace in this technology. And it is very important to keep up with the new arrivals because each of them offers significant potential and a promise to solve for a differentiated use case. And as you would see in the just 1 year time frame, we have close to 8 to 10 models emerging. And that's where we need to continuously stay on top of this, evaluate so that it works out to the best of our advantage. And moving on from here to the next slide. Now, this is no longer an S-curve, what we have seen in technology adoption. In fact, this is going to be spikes of SS, which keep coming on with each technology. And the kind of effort which is there is again going to reduce further. The performance is going to increase, but at a very dramatic pace. So what do? The best way to do is to keep experimentation and hands-on practices and always check for data, check for facts, stay in touch with industry leaders. I'm sure there are a lot of early adopters there, and it works with the same, you will have a review coming in of the latest iPhone or the latest Samsung releases. There are a lot of reviews coming in for the latest model. Everybody is out there to try it out, get up to date with it, check what are the specific use cases it can solve. And there are folks like, even us who keep a rapid pace or a tab on what could it do for life sciences. So a lot of it, which we need to stay updated. And, the best way to do is to follow some of these, experiment, look at references, and continue to stay updated with this new technology. With that, we move on to the next slide. With all promises comes pitfalls, and I'm the one, who is very gung-ho about it, and I'm the one who has been asked to speak about the pitfalls, ironically. But but yeah, on the quality and consistency, I think the prompt engineering and creating application wrappers is fairly important. The trust and explainability, we have been pushed by our SMEs to work around the trust and explainability, which can be understood, and a flavor of which you would have seen in some of the today's demos. There has to be fail-safe quality and trust mechanisms, which have to be inherently built with technology and beyond technology itself, like you saw in the search and summarization demo. And to ensure data privacy security, I think as soon as the industry moved on to catch this wave, the enterprise grade APIs, which promise data security and compliance, started getting built in. There are Azure APIs, AWS, which address all of these concerns, and these should no longer be a concern. And for the rights ownership, I think there is a rapidly evolving landscape, improving capabilities. There are clarities in policies, regulations. You should be able to use it. On the last, I think it is very important that, so you would hear a lot of tools coming in the market. You will hear there's a lot of use cases being solved. But I think generative AI, what it offers is a significant opportunity, maybe to reiterate myself where I started on the call, an opportunity for tech and SMEs to work together. And that is where you should look at, externally as well as internally, to set up pilots and incubation hubs. Now, these pilots and incubation hubs will establish a clarity on use cases, will establish a solve for your problems before you scale it up to a production grade environment. And these pilots and incubation hubs could range from, let's say, 12 to 16 to 20 weeks, depending on the kind of problem statements which you have. But a unique opportunity here, your problem statements are your problem statements in your own environment. So essentially, whether internally or by partnerships, establishing incubation hubs, which not only help you stay at top of different models, experiment with different models, enable use cases, is fairly important in generative AI. So just wanted to stress on that fact. Otherwise, a whole lot of promise and a whole lot of solutions which are enabled, which has been unprecedented in life sciences. And with that, I'll hand it over back to Sandeep.
Sure. Maybe I just, other than sort of some closing remarks, there's really nothing else. So why don't we take on a few more questions while we have a few minutes left here.
I think I've tried my best, Sandeep, to answer all of that, because I'm hard pressed for time. So I think we are good, there seems like.
Okay, there may be a few questions we didn't get to, and most of them were addressed in chat. What we can do is address them offline and provide them as a record to this, or an addendum to this conversation. I think there's just so much more that we could talk about. We're limited on time today at this setting, but we're happy to address those questions. I think what I will do is just sort of summarize, at least from our perspective. We've embarked on some experiments. So to Ritesh's point, there's something new coming out every month, it seems like. So we're staying very experiment focused. We have very close sort of technology and SME ties to identify the best possible use cases. So I think overall, just kind of summing it up, I think there is definitely potential. And I think from just some of the survey responses, it sounds like this group also sees applications and use cases. It is not perfect. There are challenges, and I hope that we've presented to you a balanced view, and based in some kind of reality. Because I think, you know, what's at stake is a lot. We're talking about patient safety, potential risk to the organization, etc. So we need to tread carefully. I think also thoughtful consideration of use cases that are important in your organization, I think, is critical. So what use cases might make sense for, you know, a company which has a few hundred products, consumer brands, and high volumes, might be very different than a company who has a few products in rare disease, for example, where the depth of the questions probably is more critical than the volume of questions. So I think some thoughtful consideration of that is going to be critical as well. So let's see, we are almost at time here. Mary Beth and John, I think what we'll do is, if it's all right, you know, we've got a few more questions, we can coordinate post and kind of address those, get those back to you, and we can share that back out with the membership if that's okay.
That'll be fine, Sandeep, and thank you so much. Very thoughtful and very thought-provoking presentation today. Very much appreciate your efforts.
Thank you, and really appreciate the membership's time and interest in the topic. We're certainly passionate about it, and you know, I think there's a very interesting future ahead of us with this. So thank you again for your time and your participation today.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Ritesh. Shubha.